Hi, it's me, Teresa, and today I'm giving you the lecture, the talk about mating strategies. Okay, so here's the outline, and I'm going to go over this first. Okay, first I'm going to talk about different types of mating systems in animals. And particularly, we're going to be talking mostly about mammals and birds. You'll see why in a bit. And then we are going to talk about why different kinds of animals, why different species would have different kinds of mating systems. And then lastly, I'm going to talk about the concept of sexual selection in this lecture and how that applies to the other concepts we've been talking about. So first, I'm going to talk about the different kinds of mating systems that we see in different animals. All right, so many animals that you see in the world follow a mating system that we call polygyny. Polygyny, and it will be written on the board in a little bit. Polygyny is spelled P-O-L-Y-G-Y-N-Y, and it's poly, meaning many, and the G-Y-N indicates females. So many females is polygyny, and you see that kind of system used in many animals whereby one male mates with a lot of females. So just think of some examples off the top of my head. A gorilla. Okay, in a gorilla society, you have one big male silverback, and he mates with all of the females that are in his harem. Or you could think about deer or moose or those kind of animals where there's a big male with large horns and then many females that he fights off the other males in order to mate with the females. Or you could think of maybe lions, and you will have a male who is the only member of the pride who gets to mate with the various lionesses in the pride, and so on and so forth. You see, I'm sure you've seen a nature documentary once in your life, or have looked out in the world once in your life and seen these kinds of animals where you have one large male mating with many females. The reverse of that is called polyandry, and it still has that poly in it, but the A-N-D-R-Y indicates males. So this is where many males or multiple males mate with one female. And that is not something you see very often in the world, but we'll talk about a couple of examples of it. So I'm going to go over to the board right here, and I'm going to point out the different terms that we use for the different kinds of mating systems that we see in animals. So the question on this side is how many males are we talking about? And up here at the top, how many females are we talking about? If we have just one male and that one male mates with just one female, we call that monogamy. And I'm sure you're familiar with that word. Monogamous relationships where you have one man, one woman, and they are in a relationship together, or, just two individuals in a relationship together. If you have just one male mating with more than one female, that, like I said, is called polygyny. Whereas if you have more than one male, two males, let's say, and they both mate with just one female, that's called polyandry. And then you occasionally, but very rarely, have the situation where more than one male mates with more than one female, and we call that polygynandry or polygynandry. Either way of pronouncing it is fine. You have the many, poly, G-Y-N, females, A-N-D-R, males, many females and males. Okay, so that's how we name the different ways that animals can possibly mate with one another. Okay, so Over here on the slides, I have a few examples of animals that use the various mating systems. These are polygynous animals. You have these are sea lions, you have one large male, and he mates with multiple smaller females. And over here we have baboons. Again, we have one large male mating with multiple smaller females, and that's how their family system is set up. Whereas polyandry, which again is much more rare, we see in some species, but not often. For example, some species of birds, you'll see 2 males with 1 female, or the classic example, I think, is marmosets. Marmosets are very small monkeys that live in South America, and in their mating system, 2 males usually, and they're usually brothers, mate with 1 female. And we'll talk about reasons for that in just a bit. A good example of monogamous animals are many kinds of birds, like geese especially. Geese are known for being monogamous not just within one mating season. So usually when we're talking about all of these terms, polygyny, polyandry, monogamy, or polygynandry, all of them we're talking about within a given mating season, okay? And then some animals might choose a different mate for the next mating season. But occasionally you have animals that, as they say, mate for life. And some species of geese are like that. Some predator birds, some other kinds of hawks, and wolves. Wolves tend to be monogamous. Okay, so why do we see these differences in mating systems? I'll wait for that to clear up. Okay, so why would a certain species evolve a particular mating system? That's what we're going to talk about next. And the concept that really determines this is known as parental investment. Okay, so we've had the different types of mating systems. We've talked about that. Why do we have them? And it boils down to differences in parental investment. So that's what I'm going to be talking about now. So as an organism, you can have various levels of parental investment, or sometimes they just call it PI. Parental investment is how much energy a parent organism puts towards their offspring. And sometimes the amount of energy is very minimal. Okay, so for example, many species of fish. In many species of fish, the male will release a bunch of sperm into the water, and the female will release a bunch of eggs into the water. And as long as they're nearby one another, a lot of those eggs will get fertilized, and some of those fish will make it to adulthood, and that's how they reproduce. So that's extremely low parental investment. All you have to do essentially is make a sperm or an egg. But then parental investment increases all the way up to the kinds of things you see in human beings, where we take care of our kids, at least for 18 years in our country, and often we take care of our kids for our entire lives. We spend our entire lives having some kind of relationship with these people where we're caring for them in some way, and vice versa. So parental investment can be anywhere along that continuum. Okay. The thing is, though, that when you're talking about mammals, particularly, but also in birds, there's a discrepancy between how much parental investment the female makes and how much parental investment the male makes. So there's parental investment in general, and then there's female parental investment and male parental investment. Okay, so let's just talk about mammals, like humans. Humans are a mammal. Okay, so Female mammals have a much higher level of parental investment than male mammals. Let's just start at the very beginning. The egg that a female makes is much more costly to make than a sperm. It's more costly to make them, and it's more costly to keep them inside of your body until they're ready to use. Then you have to have release of these eggs throughout your life. You have to have a womb in which the fertilized egg can implant. And that brings us to the next part of female parental investment, which is pregnancy. Female animals that are mammals have to go through pregnancy. We carry our babies, at least the placental mammals, the ones that have placentas. We carry our babies inside of our uterus until they are born, and that is can be anywhere from days to months, and that is extremely costly. It's costly in terms of the female has to feed that fetus. The female has to protect the fetus. The female becomes a lot larger and more vulnerable to predators, okay? So being pregnant is a huge risk and very costly for the female in mammal species. Then there's the birth process. And you probably know that, for the history of mankind, the most common way for women to die was in childbirth. And this is true for all mammals. They have to give birth, and giving birth is a dangerous process. It's dangerous for you, it's dangerous for the offspring, and so it's very costly. Needless to say, there are things like creating a placenta for placental mammals, and those are very difficult to produce, very metabolically costly, and something that might give a disadvantage to that organism. Then mammals have to nurse their offspring. And so whether you're talking about a dog or a monkey or a human or a kangaroo, all female mammals nurse their offspring. And milk is extremely costly to make. And it takes time. So it costs your metabolism, it costs you your time, and you're also vulnerable when you are nursing. What does a male mammal have to do? What is required of a male in order for him to produce offspring? So the things I've been talking about for female mammals, all of those things are necessary for the baby just to survive. The egg has to be produced, the pregnancy has to be carried to term, the baby has to be born, and then they have to nurse the baby. Otherwise the baby dies, okay, or feed the baby. What does a male have to do? Make sperm and find a way of getting it into the female's reproductive system. Those are the costs for males. There's no other necessary cost. There's no other necessary male parental investment other than making the sperm and inseminating the female. Okay. So I know all of this that I've been talking about is very gender binary, okay? And gender is not binary. It's not binary in the human species, and it's definitely not binary in animal species. However, most of the, as you know in our society, most of the focus is on the gender binary of this is how a genetically male animal mates, and this is how a genetically female animal mates. But of course, there are all different kinds of gender differences. And then of course, things like homosexual behavior is well represented in both humans and animals, of course. But we're talking here for the purposes of reproduction, okay? So those kinds of systems do occur and are definitely represented, but we are focusing here on producing offspring. Okay. So, There's a huge difference in parental investment for males and females when it comes to mammals. The male strategy should be to fertilize as many females as he possibly can, and it doesn't really matter to the male what the quality is that he provides to the offspring. He really just needs to inseminate the female and leave. And so that is the typical male mating strategy that we've been talking about, where you have males who want to inseminate as many females as possible. However, for female mammals, where there's a much higher level of parental investment for all the reasons we just talked about, you want to make sure that your mate is a quality mate, and you really don't care about the quantity of your mates. So males want to mate with as many females as possible, and you're not really that choosy about quality. With females, it should be exactly the opposite. You want the male who's going to provide for you the best genes that you can possibly get, and you don't need to mate with multiple males. You only need to mate with one male. If you continue to mate with other males, it's not going to do anything better for you than mating with just one male in most circumstances. And so you have to ask yourself then, what most mammalian species will be. Will they be monogamous, polyandrous, polygynous, polygonandrous? And the answer is they are going to be polygynous. They are going to practice polygyny. You are typically going to have just one male mate with more than one female because he wants to have as big of a quantity of females as he can have, and she wants the highest quality male that she can get. And indeed, you see that polygyny is by far the most represented mating system in mammals. So the vast majority of mammals, 90% or more of mammal species are indeed polygynous, where you have one large male who fights off the other males and then mates with multiple females. Sorry that picture's going in and out of being not too clear. Okay. So whether you're talking about lions or deer, gorillas or mandrills or baboons or sea lions, the case is the same. They're all polygynous. And in fact, well, before I move on, humans have a strong tendency towards polygyny, whether it's culturally accepted or not. In our culture, for various reasons, the predominant mating system that is approved by our culture is monogamy. However, you are probably aware that that's not always the case. Humans are very complicated. But if you were to look at human societies throughout history and across the world, the vast majority of those have been polygynous. You know, you can read any ancient texts, you know, read the Bible or the Quran or what have you, and you're going to see that there's one powerful male and he takes many wives, as they say. And that occurs in cultures today across the world, and definitely historically has been much more well represented than what we currently have approved of today. Okay, so monogamy, though, does occur in, let's see. Okay, sorry. Monogamy does occur in about 10% of mammals. Okay, so there are mammal species that are monogamous that we know of. And polyandry, where you have one female who mates with multiple males, is so rare that it's barely represented. So like I say, marmosets are about the only example I can think of off the top of my head. So very, very rare. Okay, but what about birds? Okay, so birds are a little bit different than mammals. Birds don't have a pregnancy. Birds don't nurse their young. Okay, so there are differences when it comes to birds. Well, the female does have to make the egg and lay the egg, and the male only has to inseminate the female. Okay, so there is a slightly larger cost for the female to make an egg than for a male to make sperm. But then after that point, it's pretty equal. Both animals can and do build a nest. Both animals can and do sit on the eggs and feed the young once they hatch. And so both parents can and do participate in all of this process. Whereas in mammals, the male can't. The male can't participate in the pregnancy. The male can't participate in the nursing process. But in these species, there's no more reason for the females to do it than for the males. And so you would think that monogamy would be the most common mating system for birds, and it is. You have the male bird strategy, quality, yes, you want a good female because you're going to spend a lot of time building that nest and sitting on those eggs and feeding those offspring. But, maybe also you might want quantity too, if you can get it. Whereas with the female strategy, yeah, you want to have a quality male, and for her, quantity doesn't really matter too much. And so what are you going to have when there's more equality between the different needs of the genders? And the answer is that most bird species are going to have a monogamous mating system, and that is in fact what you see in most birds. Okay, but the male problem in this case is, what if you inseminate the female, you build the nest with her, you start taking care of the babies, and she dies? Now you by yourself can't take care of the babies. It takes two birds to take care of the babies. So what do? Well, but the female has the same issue too. If the male dies, you don't have that partner, and now you've lost the babies because you can't take care of them by yourself. Imagine you're a little bird up in a nest in a tree, okay? But the males have an additional problem. How can the male be sure that the babies he's raising are his? The female knows, okay? The female laid the egg. It came out of the female. She knows those babies are hers. She knows which babies are hers. But what if the female snuck off and mated with another male? Or what if another male snuck in and mated with the female when the first male wasn't around? Now, if the other male impregnated the female, he could get that other male to raise his genetic offspring without any investment from the guy who flew away. The guy who leaves the kids, now he can get the one who's staying to take care of these babies while he goes off and just takes care of himself. So if you're the male bird who's going to stick around through this, you want to be dang sure that those babies are yours. And this is the problem of cuckoldry. Cuckoldry is where a male animal invests in babies that are not his. In other words, he's tricked into taking care of babies that are not genetically related to him. That's not good for passing on his genes, is it? All of evolution is about survival and reproduction. If he's not reproducing his genes, that's lost time and energy for him, evolutionarily speaking. It's called cuckoldry because the cuckoo bird does this. The cuckoo bird lays its eggs in other birds' nests, and then those other birds will raise the cuckoo's baby. Okay, so that's where the word cuckoldry came from. And you'll hear it in Shakespeare, stuff like that. A guy is a cuckold, where the female mated with another male, and now this guy is raising offspring that are not genetically his. So, what are the kinds of solutions that animals come up with to the problem of cuckoldry? Well, one good solution has been, evolutionarily speaking, jealousy. By guarding your mate, by always being there and making sure your mate doesn't go other places, and making sure that no other guys come in where your mate is, it keeps you from becoming a cuckold. And so one of the concepts of why organisms may have evolved jealousy is in order to make sure that the parental investment is going to animals that are your actual genetic offspring. And this brings us to a really good point, which is about proximate and ultimate mechanisms. We talked about proximate and ultimate mechanisms in previous classes, and you'll remember that proximate mechanisms are things like hormones or social explanations or emotions. In other words, proximate mechanisms are an explanation of what's going on right now, okay? So if you had an emotion that motivates a behavior, if you evolved to have the emotion of jealousy, okay? So some kind of mutation occurred in structures that build your brain, and it created a brain that made you be a little bit jealous, okay? That gene that made it so that you're a little bit more prone to jealousy than another animal might make you have this emotion that causes you to guard your mate. That's the proximate mechanism, okay? What's the ultimate explanation there? Well, by doing that, you make sure that those offspring are yours. And that's extremely important, evolutionarily speaking. The offspring that you put your investment into better be yours. Females always know it's theirs because they gave birth to the organism, to the offspring. But males can't be sure. So they have evolved various mechanisms by which they protect their parental investment. If you watch bird species, you'll see many bird species, the male will very carefully monitor where the female is at all times. And if he sees another male getting too close, he will fight him off. He'll chase him off. Okay, so this is the kind of thing that you see happening all the time. So the ultimate explanation is always survival and reproduction. It's always, how does this behavior contribute to survival and reproduction? So you see a situation, the little bird is in the nest, another male comes up, the male and the female are in the nest, another male comes up, the male bird gets jealous, chases the other bird away. Proximate mechanism. What's the ultimate explanation for him doing that? To protect his reproductive investment. Survival and reproduction. The last thing I'm going to talk about in this lecture is sexual selection. Okay, so we've been talking about natural selection. Natural selection is where the environment favors one member of a species over another member of the species because they have a trait that helps them survive and reproduce. Okay, that's what natural selection is. Natural selection is anything that happens in the environment that makes it so that one animal who does a certain behavior or has a certain trait survives and reproduces better, a little bit better or a lot better, than another member of the same species, okay? So that could be by being bigger, that could be by being smaller and better able to hide. It could be sharper claws, longer teeth. It could be any kind of trait. And one of those traits, of course, is sex. And so there is sexual selection. During the mating process, there is selection that occurs. The females select a male and the male selects females. How does this occur? Okay, well, there are two main ways that this goes down. The first one I'm going to focus on is called intrasexual selection, okay? I-N-T-R-A, intrasexual selection. Intrasexual selection means within a sex. This is where males mate with other males. Males mate with other males. Duh, Teresa. Males fight with other males, or females fight with other females. So within their gender, okay, which usually matches their biological sex, within that, the males will fight with the other males in order to mate with the females, okay? So here's a male. He wants to mate, let's say it's moose, okay? You have two big male moose and they go at each other, ram their antlers into each other. One wins, one loses, okay? Same thing for gorillas, you know, two males might fight with each other to be able to, get the harem. We've named a whole bunch of species that work this way. Sea lions, the elephant seals, over 90% of mammals, this is what they do. And then much more rarely, you might see females compete with other females. But that is usually in polyandrous, okay, mating systems. You'll see a female compete with another female, okay? And that is intrasexual selection. Competition within a sex where usually it's males fight with one another in order to reproduce with the females. Because it's usually polygynous groups. Okay. Like I say, bears, elephant seal, moose, you name it, that's what they typically do. But if you had a polyandrous species, you would see the females fighting with one another. Okay. This is a picture of the big elephant seals, the two, they call them beach masters. They are enormous, their bodies are enormous, and they are ferocious, and they will battle one another. And then when one clearly loses, he slinks off into the ocean, and the winning beach master gets to mate with all the females in that area. And he's the biggest and toughest, so that's the genes that the females want to get. But the other kind of selection is intersexual selection, so I-N-T-E-R, and that is between the sexes, okay? So the sexes also have evolved traits to attract one another. And these might be things like, you see a peacock. The male has these big, beautiful feathers that he shows off to attract the females. Typically when you look at bird species and reptile species too, the more colorful ones are the males. And those are usually in bird species that are actually polygynous. The male will develop these outlandish colors in order to attract the females, okay? However, there are other adaptations too. In humans, females advertise their reproductive fitness through other means. So, when we were talking about things like peacocks and birds and lizards, the male is advertising his reproductive fitness to the females. He's saying, I am so fit, I can carry around this big tail and it's not going to hurt me. I am so fit that I can be very flashy colors and predators still can't get me. So you're advertising to the female, whoa, you're awesome. Okay, and you see that a lot in bird species. In mammal species, though, and let's talk about humans for a second. Human females have evolved to have very large breasts. Even human females who we think, you think, oh, I have small breasts. Your breasts are huge compared to other animals, okay? Other animals, think of a monkey. It's just flat with a nipple. Or a dog, it's just flat with a nipple, unless there's milk in there, okay? All the other mammals that you can think of, flat with a nipple. Not humans. Even, humans with relatively small chest, human females with relatively small chest, have very large breasts in comparison with other animal species. And what does that do? It advertises that you are ready to take care of a baby. You are a good person to invest. If you're a male, come invest with me and help me take care of my offspring, and I will be a great parent to those offspring. I will be able to provide for these offspring. But human males have also evolved to have large penis and testicles to attract, ostensibly, heterosexual human females for mating purposes. So it's not just the breasts on the female. If you compare a male human's penis and testicles to like a gorilla or a monkey, it's huge, okay? Monkeys, gorillas have tiny penis and testicles because, why? Well, all they have to do is fight off the other male, and then it doesn't matter how great their junk looks. Whereas for humans, it's a lot more complicated. It's a lot more complicated than that. And so one of the things that males have evolved is to have large penis and testicles, which is presumably better suited to mating. It advertises fitness. So these are the concepts I want you to be thinking about as you're engaging with The Moral Animal, the book The Moral Animal. I want you to be thinking about all of these concepts I've talked about during this lecture today. If you don't read this book, you're going to be completely lost on the exam. It's absolutely crucial that you are reading this book at the same time as you're engaging with the lecture material. Okay, you guys? So really, really, really get on that. Read your book. It's fun. It's a fun book. It's an interesting book. It teaches you a lot about the world. And it's cool to learn about what animals are doing and about this evolutionary perspective on what humans are doing. So this is where I want you to be. Thinking about how human behavior came to be in an evolutionary sense. In all of your classes, you've been talking about how human behavior has come to be in various senses. In terms of hormones, in terms of cultural influences, social influences, developmental influences, etc. Okay? And those are all proximate explanations, and those are all valid. But now I want you to be thinking at the same time as you're thinking about those proximate mechanisms, the ultimate explanations. In other words, how do these behaviors, whether you're talking about sex, whether you're talking about mating systems, whether you're talking about emotions, okay, hormones, how do these factors, how do these behaviors, how do these traits influence survival and reproduction? Keep that in your noggin.